Here's a couple scenes you just might encounter as you're wandering through Sligo. The picture on the left is between Maple Avenue and New Hampshire, where the hills are very steep. The one on the right is, I think, in the Kent Mill area. So let's get started. All right, we're going to do it in this order. We'll start out with 3 easy trees that you're certain to see and that are easy to identify. So you'll be off to a running start. Then I'll introduce the categories I've created of bark, just to my personal tastes. Then we'll go through 25 species in the 6 categories. We'll have a few intermission features so your eyes don't glaze over after looking at too much bark. And we'll have 3 quizzes to help you review. Thanks to Christine for setting those up. And I'll throw in some additional resources along the way. Here's the categories I've broken them down into, and they're pretty self-explanatory. Smooth bark, thin, narrow strips, broken, irregular pieces, which I think I called something else once we get down there. Shallow ridges like that. Big chunky ridges like this one. Flaky bark like that over there. Okay, here are 3 easy trees that you probably look familiar, and I'll just either confirm or inform you for the first time what they are. On the left, you almost certainly have seen the American beech, one of our native. These are all native trees, by the way, and it's easily identified by its thin gray bark, and you'll see it on hillsides just about anywhere in Sligo. In the middle is northern red oak with the ski slope flattened white ridges on it, which we'll go over. And on the right is American sycamore. So American beech, Fagus grandifolia. There it is with the plain white, gray smooth bark. It's fairly common in Sligo, not the most common level of abundance, but fairly common in Sligo, except for one stretch between Dennis Avenue and Forest Glen. You find it on moist wooded slopes, and it holds onto its leaves for a very long time throughout the winter. You might know that oaks also do that, and it's no accident that oaks and beech are in the same family. They're closely related. I like oaks. Beeches. These leaf buds are. I just like them. They're long, long, narrow, and elegant. The bark. One of the disadvantages of a thin bark is it's not fire resistant, but most of Eastern North America is under a fire repression regime for many decades. And this has probably led to it being a lot more dominant than it otherwise would be. Some people say that because of fire suppression, we're going from oak hickory forests in many areas to beech maple forests because they're very competitive and they don't have to worry about fire. One of the curious things I learned in putting this together is that beneath the thin bark of beech is a photosynthetic layer of cells called the cork skin. And incredibly, whether it's scraped off like this or not, sunlight can penetrate this very thin bark and generate energy for beeches, which gives them another advantage. The second very common tree that I hope you immediately enjoy identifying is northern red oak. It has these the ridges that are flattened on the top, along the tops, and much lighter colors. Some people call them ski slopes because they sort of weave in and out as they come down the tree. And when the sun is on them, it's almost impossible to mistake it for anything else. It's also fairly common, but in all sections of Sligo. And it's quite versatile. It's on moist slopes and stream banks. The only place you won't find it is on very dry slopes, down between Maple and the power line. The third really easy tree is the American sycamore. Uh, it when it's mature, if it's allowed to get to mature, it's considered the most massive tree east of the Rocky Mountains. The curious, interesting thing about it, one of the interesting things is at the bottom, lower trunk is very scaly, like you see on the left. The middle trunk is a transition zone between the scaly and the smooth bark. The tops are almost completely smooth. The scaly bark, as we'll see with the whole section of scaly bark trees, is very useful for overwintering adult insects who can sort of hunker down underneath those flakes. And then you see them, like someone posted on iNaturalist a couple of days ago, a morning cloak butterfly flying around, and it could easily have been spending the most of the winter under flaky bark like that. So I've said a couple of times how, like this one, common in all of Sligo. How do I know that? Why do I say that? Well, we have a very good source, and it's the John Parrish Inventory of Native Plants of Sligo from 2003. It was published on our website in 2003. And he's a professional, highly regarded field botanist. He grew up in the Sligo watershed, and he did this massive inventory. And you can find it right now. The best version of it is still on our old website, old.fos.org, as you see there. From the homepage, you go to plants and animals, then you choose plants, and then you choose this inventory, and you can search by common name, by Latin name, by just the word oak. So here are all the oaks of Sligo. We have 13 species. And so you see under occurrence, that's where I'm getting how common or uncommon a tree is. The sections, back in when the founding of Friends of Sligo Creek, the watershed was divided into, the Sligo main stem was divided into 9 sections. And you can find a map of the sections. Currently they go from East-West Highway up to through Kemp Mill. And then where I get the habitat information, and this is not their habitat throughout the eastern deciduous forest, but specifically in Sligo. Now, if you want a cheat sheet, I developed this back in 2009 using the John Parrish inventory. This prints out on an 8.5 by 11 page, and you can fold it in half. Here you see the species. Here's American beech. FC is fairly common. Here are the sections. We don't have the habitat here. And very handily, the sections are defined over here. So you can see where he's talking about having found. If we look at plane tree family, the sycamore, C/A, that's common, and A is all of Sligo. So you can find that on the new website and the old website. And print it out and have it in your backpack. All right, let's go on to some more smooth bark species, of which there are not many, actually. We talked about American beech. We'll talk about ironwood. Well, we already talked about American sycamore. And we'll talk about red maple. So here's number 2 on smooth bark, ironwood, a tree I really like. It has this very interesting habit of forming its trunk and its bigger branches in this sort of sinewy, people think it's muscle-like pattern. Sometimes when they get much older, like this one on the upper right, it's a little harder to tell, but if you look at it, you will notice it does have this sinewy character. If you're in doubt, especially for an older tree, you can look up and see if the samaras, the seed structure, is still hanging from the branches. Or if you're in early spring, you can look for the male flowers here that look a lot like oak catkins. So it's fairly common. It's found in all sections, and it's usually found along the creek, but you will see it up on slopes also. The third one might be a surprise, red maple. It is smooth only in the upper portions, but you might find yourself in a woods or on a trail where there's a dense understory with small trees, shrubs, you don't see the base of the tree. You look up, okay, smooth bark. I wonder if that's a beech. But you look down at the lower portion and you'll see that it's very rough. And that's typical of red maple. If you have any doubt, you can look at the ground and see if you can find a leaf, a dead leaf, to confirm your suspicions. So it is also common in all of Sligo. And last but not least, we've mentioned already American sycamore. The smooth bark, if you've ever been on GW Parkway in the fall or winter and pulled over on one of the scenic overlooks and you look across the river at Georgetown University, near there is a tremendous stand of American sycamore, a huge stand of American sycamore, and only the very silvery white, just brilliant white parts of the trunks are visible. And if the sun is setting, it's a spectacular sight. But you might look at it and think, wow, look at those beeches. They look amazing. But they're all sycamores. All right, pretty big category is flaky bark. And one of these we've already gone over. Flaky bark number 1, white oak, Quercus alba, common throughout Sligo. I didn't have a chance to look this up, but I think it's called white oak because of how white the bark is. This picture was taken near sunset, so it's a little deceptive. It usually has this tremendously straight trunk. The flakiness can vary from this extreme version on the right to this is more typical, a subtler version. Insects also use these underside of these flakes for safe harbor in over the course of the winter. It's like it says, moist and dry woodlands. It's adaptable. It's in a lot of places in Sligo. If you've ever encountered the Psalms of the Old Testament, they frequently refer to the sturdy oak. And once you look at a bunch of oaks like this, yeah, sturdiness is one of their obvious qualities. Let's see. All right, flaky bark number 2, silver maple. It can look a little like white oak. I don't have very good pictures of it. I'm sorry about that. I think it's more profligately flaky. You can, if you have binoculars, and I should mention that when I go out to look at trees, I always have binoculars because you might want to look at, try to catch the leaves or the seeds that are pretty high up. And so having binoculars is quite handy. But if you can see that the branching is opposite, which we're not going to go into really today, or you can see the leaves, that'll help you distinguish. Or if it's not holding on to its leaves, you know it's probably not an oak, so the chances of it being silver maple might be better. But I almost always see it right along the creek, very close to the water, or to the stream bank at any rate. Black cherry, now in some people's classification of bark, they wouldn't call this flaky, they would put it in a separate category, like plates, I think they call it. Yeah, but it's unique. There's nothing looks like it. One friend of mine says she thinks it looks like a candle wax melting down the side of a candle. That's how she remembers it. If you have any doubt, you can go up close and look to see if you see the lenticels. And these are the typically on like sweet cherry or the cherry blossom, Japanese cherries. They have horizontal lines on them. And you can see them if you get up close on these chips of bark, even though they're all separated and disjointed, they're still there. It's an early succession tree. It'll show up in the power line in blazing sun, and that's where it's typical. That's what its usual method is. But it hangs around for a long time after all the other trees grow up around it. But its seedlings cannot survive under its own shade, so it eventually disappears. The fourth one, other treatments will call this shredding bark. and not flaky, but I threw it in this category anyway. There's, again, nothing like it. These huge swaths of bark peeling off. It's also fairly common in Sligo, except for these two sections. That's section 2, New Hampshire to Maple, and section 8, Dennis University. Almost always near water. You will see some planted by the Parks Department. They seem to like planting river birch. So you see more of it than would be here otherwise. And we already talked about American sycamore. But if you were driving the parkway in your car, or it was raining, you didn't want to look up, and you look over, you see this, just don't leap to the conclusion that it's something else, because it could be sycamore. All right, so at Christine's suggestion, we're having a quiz. Take a break from looking at bark, learning new bark. So there should be a poll that pops up on your screen, and you can just go ahead and, whoops, if you might have to move it out of the way, and click on whichever one you think is white oak, and then we'll tally up the answers and see if I'm doing a good job of getting this across. So, well, let's call it. People did really well. 81% got the right answer. It's number 2. On the left is sycamore, and on the right is the northern red oak. So congratulations. Oops. Okay, let's see. All right, now a quick break from staring at bark. Here's like the major field guide to bark. Came out in 2011, I think. And here's the author's website, Know Your Trees. And like I said, he breaks down the bark types into slightly different kinds of categories. And he also covers all the conifers, which they have more of in New England. I will tell you that when I first got this book, I took a trip to Maine to see my sister, and I was eager to try out my bark ID skills. And I discovered that, at least where she lives in Maine, it's almost impossible because all the trees are completely covered in lichen. You can't see a thing. So, all right, let's go ahead. All right, now here's our next category, which we'll call small irregular blocks. You're probably quite familiar with, just gonna do it again, no, with dogwood. Black gum might be less familiar. Persimmon, even more so. Southern red oak, I've always found to be a tough one, but I think now that I've had to prepare this, I feel much better about southern red oak. Hopefully you will too, by the time we're done. All right, flowering dogwood, many people have it in their front yards. And you can see the bark is all broken up into tiny little chunks. Because there are these three other species we're going to discuss, if you ran into one in the woods, and it's not so carefully tended as it's in the yard, it might look different, you might be confused. If it's late enough in the winter, you will see these really interesting flower buds, and that's one way you can narrow it down. It's also branches oppositely as opposed to alternate. Whoops. And that's another clue you can use. Another one, a really cool tree, is persimmon, American persimmon. It's fairly common in Sligo, except for the stretch from Maple to Wayne. That's 2 sections. No, yeah, that's 2 sections, 3 and 4. It takes on somewhat different forms. This one here is in the Kemp Mill area. I think that's the most typical of these 3. Stephen Davies found this one near the Wheaton Branch Ponds. It's just crazy, but it's definitely little teeny blocks all stacked up. And this one, I can't remember where this one's from. I think it might be in Northwest Branch, but that's also just shows you the variety of forms it can take. And if you're really lucky, before all the animals get them, the fruits, beautiful fruits like this, and don't eat it unless it's really ripe, or else they'll give you a puckering sensation you won't forget very soon. So this is a good chance to take a slight pause to talk about this abundance business. You saw how how you can use the John Parrish inventory from our website, which gives you the abundance and where it's located as of 2003. Now we have iNaturalist, and Friends of Sligo, Sligo has tremendous number of people participating. It's really spectacular. So you look up persimmon. Now John Parrish says it's fairly common. It's almost in every section except for this these two sections from Maple to Wayne. But iNaturalist only has 9 locations, 16 observations, and 7 of them duplicate. So here's the map from the iNaturalist, and here's the Kemp Mill, the ponds, the wetlands up there, the flat floodplains. Here's some side channels. Is that Evans Parkway? I can't quite tell. Here's the Dennis Avenue ponds. This is that crazy looking one. This one right here that Stephen Davies found. There's another one over here. So they're really scattered. And I think it's because, iNaturalist doesn't necessarily attract as much attention for plants unless you're really a plant person. And it's, people like to go after the spring ephemerals and then all the asters family plants in the fall. So if you really want a good sense, if you want to find an individual persimmon, this is a great way to find one. If you want to get a sense of the abundance and distribution, then the Parrish list is much better. Here's another tree that's known for its little tiny blocks built up over the tree, black gum. It's fairly common throughout Sligo. It's a tree that I became familiar with only recently, but I just keep seeing it more and more and more. Oops. It has a couple of interesting features that help a great deal in identification, especially if you think it might be a persimmon. And that is, one is that the branches come off at very strict 90-degree angles, directly left and right. And this tree is a really good example. This one too, straight out. The only thing you have to be careful of, if it's a really skinny tree, if it happens to have a serious poison ivy vine going up it, those branches also go off at 90 degrees. And they can look very lush. If you can think it's part of the tree. It's quite easy to be fooled by poison ivy. So you want to take a close look and see, is that poison ivy I'm looking at, or is that the black gum? But if without the leaves at a time of year like when these pictures, I took these pictures in the last couple of weeks, you won't have that problem. And the second interesting thing is that for some reason, and Ken Bauer pointed this out to me on an outing from Maryland Native Plant Society, something happens at the top of black gums always. And it gets very weird. It goes off at an angle, it gets kind of skinny. This one is very strange. And it's not from like wind or some sort of animal or a disease or an insect. They just always do this. And when they get up to about 60 feet or something like that. So that's a super handy trick for black gum. And I think this is the last one, southern red oak. Now this tree gets much, much bigger than any of the previous ones. This is from a neighbor's yard. This is from below the Hillwood Manor area below New Hampshire Avenue. Many, many more pieces in the bark. If you're in doubt, which I frequently am with southern red oak, look around on the ground, and it has these very typical leaves with the long central lobe extending out from the top, all kinds of shapes, but it always has that long central lobe. It's fairly common in all of Sligo, so you're almost bound to find it. So the next category is another really distinctive one, like those first three we looked at, and that's these chunky ridges. That's what I call it. And there's 3 kinds that can take this look: black walnut, chestnut oak, and eastern cotton. So black walnut is in all sections of Sligo. Honestly, I don't see it that often. I don't notice it. I don't know why, but I don't. This one is in the Dale Drive neighborhood park. There's 4 or 5 of them all together. One thing you can be sure of is that it will grow on floodplains, wet environments. It will not grow on slopes. So if you see anything like this that's on a slope, it's which would be lower Sligo, it's probably chestnut oak. But fortunately, there are frequently a lot of walnuts on the ground under these, unlike the acorns, which just disappear quickly, or eaten or buried very quickly. You can always find acorns. Chestnut oak, I wasn't going to put it in because it's only from Maple Avenue to the power line, but it's a cool tree. It's a sign of dry conditions. In fact, one of the field guides I use says that in the East, chestnut oak is as sure a sign of dry conditions as cactus is in the West. So it competes really well when there's very little water. Either it's really rocky soil, the water drains off quickly, or it percolates quickly. So it's considered uncommon, but if below, especially below the Carroll Avenue Bridge and below New Hampshire Avenue, you see a lot of it. Like I mentioned, if you see something like this on a slope, wherever you're hiking, you can be sure it's not, it might look a lot like walnut. In fact, it does look a lot like walnut, but walnut won't grow on a dry slope. If you're lucky, if it's in the early fall, it has these really gigantic acorns, and those are the leaves. And the last one is Eastern Cottonwood, which is uncommon in Sligo, so it's won't be surprised if you haven't seen it. These two are in Kemp Mill, just east of the paved trail and not that far north of the sidewalk to the shopping mall parking lot. It's very wet there. I wasn't sure of what it was, but I found lots and lots of cottonwood leaves on the ground, so I made an executive decision. That's what it was. So it's in various sections of Sligo, these sections here. Let's see. All right, time for quiz number 2. Which one of these is black gum? And Christine will put up the quiz. And I've put the habitat in there because it's important. All right, that seems to be almost everybody. We have excellent students again. So it is A, that's 74% of you. Of course, I left in the 90-degree angle branch and the remains of a 90-degree angle branch. The black gum has the blocky little segments all lined up. This, of course, could be chestnut oak, but I marked floodplain, which means it's a walnut. And that's from the Dale Avenue Park, and this floodplain is this is persimmon. If you're ever in Northwest Branch Park, north of Colesville Road, there's a whole lot of these. I don't know, 20 of them in the floodplain. You know, a quarter of a mile north of on the east side. Fantastic stand up. All right, so this might be the last category, is these flat, narrow strips or ridges. So there's 5 of them, and some could go in a different category. Now, we've already done red maple, so that makes it seem not so intimidating. But these are all pretty common, so good to know them. American elm, contrary to popular opinion, even though the Dutch elm disease wiped out huge numbers of American elm trees, especially along city streets, including the college town I went to, Madison, Wisconsin. They lost all their elms. There's still tons of them left. The National Mall, you know, virtually all those survived. They're doing really well. This is the classic shape of an elm if it's growing out in the open, like a specimen tree, like on the mall. But one of the tricks to this is that it does it even as an understory tree in the wild. This is one near where I live, just downstream from Maple. You can see it, the trunks almost always branch off They don't go up straight like oaks or tulip trees or walnuts. So that's a very handy trick. And another trick I learned from Ken Bauer is that if these strips are spongy. So if you think, oh, maybe that's a black gum and it's winter, there are no leaves. If you press on this bark, it will always go down. It will go in. You'll be able to depress it easily. And that's a sure sign that that's American elm. So it's common throughout Sligo. It's always along the creek side. It likes water or in the floodplains. This one is really, I really love mockernut, or the hickory trees. These have the flat strips that that crisscross, and you can, from a distance, I find it's easy to notice that there are these diamond shapes all over here, and that just jumps out at me. It's fairly common now. Without leaves, and even with leaves, sometimes telling mockernut from pignut can be difficult. But in the winter, the squirrels and whatnot, they'll leave the shells behind, and you can just rummage around in the leaves. You can usually find them. If the shell is really thick like this, it's mockernut, and that's how it got its name, because it sort of mocks you. That is, you think you've got this tremendously big nut to eat, and you open it and you find out it's mostly shell. So, whereas the pignut has a much thinner shell. And there's ways to tell the leaves apart, but we won't go into that right now. So this, like I said, it's fairly common, and he says it's on moist or dry slopes, which means it's adaptable. They're both adaptable. Sassafras. Now most of the sassafras I see in Sligo is nowhere near this big, but this one is just above New Hampshire Avenue. And it is, well, John Parrish calls it common. I don't know how many big mature ones there are. I'd like to know more about that. And some people would call these ridges and not strips. So, so it looks a little bit like northern red oak. Those look a little bit like ski slopes, but because they're so the width is so consistent, doesn't look like northern red. But this is one of those trees where you really want to look up and hope that it's not the dead of winter, or look at the ground to see the unmistakable sassafras leaves, some with 3 lobes, some with 2 lobes. Some maybe have no lobes, but you can see the mixture of lobes, and I had to look up to get this one nailed down. So open woodlands and forest edges. I noticed in section 8 between Dennis and University that when there's nothing in the understory, no shrubs, no saplings, there are plenty of sassafras, which makes me think that deer don't eat them. They don't like root beer. Here's one you might not think of as narrow flat strips, because I mean, for me, the color jumps out. It's just so pale, and all the suckering. This is box elder. It grows right on the creek edges in people's yards. Some people consider it a trash tree. It is a maple. That means that the branching is opposite, like you see here. Besides all the suckering, one of the things about this tree is that the new growth, the most recent stems are always green. Even now, last year's new stems are still green like that. And that's a dead giveaway, plus the opposite branching like all maples. Earlier in the winter, you can also, even from a distance without even driving by, if you see all these samaras, maple helicopters, you say, okay, you put the look of it together with these, you say, okay, that's box elder. But there's a lot of it, common in all of Sligo. And as I mentioned, so this is red maple. Again, if you're in your car, or for some other reason, the top of the tree is obscured, you can easily be fooled. And sometimes this kind of bark extends quite a ways up the tree. And you can think that's a white oak or something, but you got to look at the whole tree. It's one of those cases where you must look at the whole tree. It's very common. And according to John Parrish, it's prone to cavities, branches breaking off, and cavities forming, and it's great for cavity nesting birds. So this little category called shallow ridges is a bit of a made up category on my part. Tulip tree, pin oak, and green and white ash. Now, tulip tree, is very common, grows really fast. It sprouts very readily from its seeds, but I find it to be one of the more difficult trees to identify, except for one handy feature. Well, let's just say tulip tree, it's in the magnolia family. It's a very primitive tree, very ancient. There's only one other in the genus in the whole world, and it's in the eastern deciduous forests of China. It's common throughout Sligo, floodplains, moist slopes, I'd say just, yeah. So you think, if you look at this, you say, okay, maybe it could be walnut, maybe it could be, cottonwood, or it could be Quercus montana, the chestnut oak or something. And it takes a lot of different forms. You look up and you're looking for these, which hang around all winter and all the way until it produces new foliage. And here they are close up. You look up and you don't even have to know what it is you're seeing. Essentially, if you see anything that's all this crowded business up in the top canopy, you're almost positive it's a tulip tree combined with this. The sycamores will hold on to their little puffy puffballs that hang from their branches for a good while, but the bark won't look anything like this. So if you combine this bark with seeing the seed heads still at the top of the tree, you can feel confident it's a tulip tree. Now, like I said, you can be easily thrown off because, look how different these are from the previous picture. That's tulip tree, this is tulip tree, and that's tulip tree. And, like I say, for all its commonness and ordinariness, it's a tricky one. So you always look up, and there you see the seed heads are still there, and you can feel very, very proud of yourself for saying, oh, it's a tulip tree. Here's one that's better identified by another technique than the bark, but this is from Kemp Mill, the stormwater ponds, just the habitat you expect to find it. The key handy trick is that pin oaks, the lowest branches always angle downward like that, or like these, downward. Nothing else does that, maybe by, accidentally one here or one there. I don't think the bark is all that distinctive, but fortunately we have this other trick. But they do form shallow ridges. Again, if you want to explore, you look around and find, okay, that could be a pin oak leaf, but they're always in wet environments. So if you see a tree with bark like that and leaves like that on a slope, it's going to be scarlet oak, or it's going to be scarlet oak, or maybe black oak. It's hard to tell apart. But pin oak is going to be down in the wetlands. And the ashes, you probably all know that because of the emerald ash borer, the Parks Department cut down every mature ash tree that was anywhere near a playground, sidewalk, a picnic area. But you can still find them in the more interior wooded areas. I'm not distinguishing between these two, but I'll just say that the white ash is an upland species and the green ash is lowlands, wet environments. So it was fairly common before about 2015 when they started cutting. But you will see a lot of seedlings. They really are successfully, recruitment, as they call it, is very successful. Here's one way to spot them from a distance with your binoculars. Just like maples, they have samaras as their seeds, but they're symmetrical. They don't have a boot-like shape. They're completely symmetrical from left to right. And in the winter, you can look up, and these long filamentous remains are what the samaras were attached to. These samaras fall off, and they leave behind these long stringy things. Here's some that haven't fallen off yet. I just took this a couple days ago, and this was still hanging on there. So that's a nice little trick for ashes, but they both do it, the green and the white. Okay, time for the last quiz. And I think Christine will pop it up there. And this one is, which is the tulip tree? Oops, should have said tulip tree. That's an old-fashioned name for it, tulip poplar. It's not related to poplars in any way, but people now call it tulip tree with a hyphen. Well, that was the most successful poll yet, probably because of the handy trick. And yes, B is the tulip tree with the seed heads visible above. On the right is the box elder with its flat ridges or flat narrow strips. It's a lot of suckering on the bark and next to water. And this is the one of the hickories. So that is the end of the bark part. I was going to throw in more fallen leaves, but this is the current poster in all of our kiosks, and it'll be up on the website at some point. Don't look too closely at this version because it's the next to the last version. A few edits had to be done. So this is the idea of this is as you're walking through the woods in the winter, late fall or winter, without even looking up, you can have a really good idea of what it is that's growing all around you. And it includes, it's all trees that we covered today. So I hope you enjoy your newfound skills. No,
okay,
I better
so
stop.
we've been having a very active chat on the while you've been going on, mostly commenting on the individual trees that you've been describing. But if we can throw it open for a few minutes now, if people have additional questions that didn't get answered through the chat, or if people want to disagree with something that somebody put up.
I think you can you can unmute yourself. Is that right, Christine? People can unmute themselves if they want.
Yeah, they can.
If they want to throw out a question, or if you, yes, will I share the PowerPoint? The answer is yes, that will go up on the website. And I think the video will also.
Right.
Let's see, I see the silver maple. Well, the silver maple doesn't look like sugar maple. It's got, 5 sort of narrow lobes. What looks like the sugar maple, which is a native in New England, is the Norway maple. It's almost a dead ringer for it, and even Canadians get confused, much to their dismay, about which is sugar and which is Norway. Any questions anybody wants to?
Well, so what would you say the rarest? Richard asked, what are the rarest native trees in Sligo? Several of us might have ideas on that.
The rarest native, hold on one second. I happen to have my.
I'm going to suggest the umbrella magnolia, because I know where there is one in section 3, and I think there's only one other in Sligo.
Yes, Hercules Club is pretty rare. There used to be one in the power line, and now there's a bunch near Sligo Middle School. Black willow is let's see, the most rare. Eastern hemlock I'm looking at here. I know of one.
There's one that was planted, I think.
Big tooth aspen is only in section 8. Let's see. There's Chinkapin oak is considered very rare. A couple of them in section 7 and 8. Let's see. Rare red mulberry, the native mulberry. Yeah, umbrella magnolia is rare, only in sections 3 and 8. Smooth Juneberry, which is also called Juneberry. Oh, serviceberry. Oh, I didn't know that. Serviceberry is, well, there must be 2. Never mind. Shadbush, but anyway, not common. Staghorn. So those are the, and fringe tree. Fringe tree is, I know some planted ones. Apparently there are others. Let's see. Yes, we'll share the PowerPoint. Okay, does anybody want to correct me? Oh, I forgot to say, we didn't go, there's some common trees I didn't go over for lack of time or feeling confident about it. Black oak, scarlet oak, black willow, I didn't go over, willow oak, red bud, and black locust. Those are the ones I could have gone over. We did do, I think, 25 trees. We have 57 native trees in Sligo, so we did about half, which isn't too bad.
And we didn't do, you didn't do, for example, Norway maple, which is very common, but it's not, as you might guess by the name, it's not native.
Yeah, I was going to do sweet cherry, which is thoroughly naturalized and not invasive, but I ran out of time. You see it a lot, and it looks like a cherry. It looks a little like a birch too, but very smooth bark, and lenticels going left and right. The bark can kind of be silvery, yellowy kind of color. Yeah. All right. Well, do you have any closing? Any invasive?
Oh, there's a James. James
question?
has his hand up for a question.
Okay,
Okay.
hi, thanks. You mentioned that there was a stand of sycamores somewhere, some impressive sycamores, and also a stand of persimmons somewhere. Could you repeat where those are located?
You mentioned the sycamores as being in GW Parkway, I think.
Oh, yes. They're not on the GW Parkway. You see them across the Potomac from the scenic overlooks. There are 2 or 3 of them as you drive along the Parkway, high up, and you look across.
Sorry, I think you said the persimmons were in Northwest Branch, just maybe.
If you park on either side of Colesville, where it crosses Northwest Branch, and you hike on the east side of Northwest Branch on the floodplain, there's 2 trails. One that goes up into the uplands, the very dry uplands, with a lot of chestnut oak. The other trail goes down to the flat floodplain, and a couple 100 yards upstream is where all the persimmons are. I've never seen the fruits. I imagine people know and collect them early. I don't know, but they're there. Yeah.
I see. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, you answered both of my questions. Thanks.
Okay, I'm not seeing any, Michael, this was just fabulous, as I figured. And I think, the word will spread. Hopefully we won't end up with 300 people for the bark walk when everybody says, you won't believe how wonderful this talk was.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you very much.
Very good.
A lot of work. And thank you, Christine Donathan, for putting together the Zoom and facilitating the Q&A, which was fun. Anyway, so thank you all. We had a whole bunch of people, and I hope we can do something like this again. And we'll see you Sunday at 2.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All
See you
right.
all later.
Thank you.